Everyone at the county auction laughed when Nora Bell raised her hand for the broken seed freezer. It sat at the far edge of the gravel lot, like a dead refrigerator from another century. Its white paint had yellowed to the color of old bone. One side was dented inward. The rubber seals sagged loose around the door. The power cord was burned black near the plug, as if the machine had stopped in the middle of one last fight. The auctioneer slapped the side of it and grinned. "Scrap metal with hinges," he said. A few men laughed. Two older farmers behind Nora called it a coffin for rotten corn. Someone else asked if she planned to grow ice in July. Even Grant Voss, the bank officer who had come to watch the sale, lowered his pen to his clipboard and shook his head when the bid climbed to $85. Nora bought it anyway. She was 24, behind on her farm loan, and already known around Mason County as the girl who thought a few internet videos had made her a farmer. But Nora was not looking at the rust. She was looking at the cereal plate, because 3 months before her mother died, Lila Bell had left behind a torn receipt with one number circled in blue ink. That number matched the freezer. And 3 weeks later, when the heat wave curled every cornfield in the county into dry yellow knives, nobody remembered laughing, because inside that broken freezer, something was still alive. If stories about forgotten people, old promises, and things the world was too quick to throw away mean something to you, consider subscribing. Because this story was not really about a broken freezer, a failing farm, or one girl everyone underestimated. It was about the names the world tried to erase. The auction was held behind the Mason County Equipment Yard, where feed bins, tractors, and surplus farm equipment sat in crooked rows under a white morning sky. By 10, heat rose from the gravel. Nora Bell stood near the back, one hand in her faded jeans, the other wrapped around a folded receipt her mother had left behind. The paper was thin from being opened too many times. In blue ink, Lila Bell had circled one serial number. Mitch Nijas Ersashetvenkilens. Nora had repeated it all morning. When county workers dragged the seed freezer into view, the crowd moved back like something spoiled had been uncovered. It was ugly, even by auction standards. The paint had yellowed, the door seal hung loose. One side was dented inward, and the power cord was burned black near the plug. Royce Calder, the auctioneer, slapped the freezer. "Next item," he said into the microphone, grinning. "One non-working seed freezer from the old research station. No warranty, no return, and no promise it won't stink up your barn." A few men laughed. Buck Harlan leaned toward his brother and spoke loud enough for Nora to hear. "Looks like a coffin for rotten corn." More laughter rolled through the yard. Nora did not laugh. She was looking at the metal plate near the lower hinge. Dirt covered most of it, but enough of the number showed. "Mitch Nijas Ersashetvenkilens." Her mother's number. Royce lifted his hand. "Who'll give me $25? Nobody moved. The silence felt easy for everyone except Nora. She raised her hand. The laughter came in pieces. First a snort, then a cough. Then Buck turned around, saw her, and his smile sharpened. "Well," he said, "I guess YouTube farming finally found refrigeration." The men around him laughed harder. Nora kept her hand raised. She was 24, 2 payments behind on Bell Farm, and tired of Mason County talking about her like a child wearing her parents' boots. Her well pump needed repair. The south fence was down. The bank had sent 2 red print letters. Near the county office steps, Grant Voss from the bank wrote something on his clipboard. That small motion hurt more than the laughter. Nora knew what it looked like. Young farmer. No cash. Bidding on a dead machine. Another bad decision for a file already heavy with proof she was failing. Her Uncle Ray stepped close. "Nora," he said quietly, "don't do this." She did not turn. "That money's for the pump." "I know." "Then let it go." His voice softened, which somehow made it worse. "Your mama left you memories, not instructions." Nora's fingers tightened around the receipt. Royce lowered the microphone. "Miss Bell, you sure?" That made the crowd quiet. Not kind, quiet. Watching quiet. Nora looked at the freezer again. The burned cord, the cracked seal, the dirt, caked number her mother had circled before sickness took her voice. "I'm sure," Nora said. Royce nodded. 25 from Miss Bell. Do I hear 30? Buck lifted a hand, still grinning. 30. Just to see how bad she wants it. The crowd laughed again, louder now, because her humiliation had a price. Nora felt heat climb her neck. 40, she said. Buck turned toward the crowd like a man working an audience. 50. Ray muttered her name. Nora thought of the envelope in her truck. $85. All she had brought. Money meant for a used pressure switch if she found one cheap enough to keep the well running. 60, she said. Buck laughed once, but his brother touched his arm. The joke had gone far enough for him, not for Nora. 75, Buck said. The auction yard fell still. Nora looked at him then, not angry, not pleading, only worn down in a way 24 should not look. 85. Royce waited. No one bid. Sold, he said. To Nora Bell. The gavel struck. Someone clapped slowly. Someone whistled. A woman near the front said Nora's mother would have known better. That nearly made Nora turn around. Instead, she walked to the freezer and wiped her thumb across the cereal plate. Dirt came away in a dark smear. Beneath the number, near the lower edge, she saw a thin scraped mark. Not roost. Not accident. A place where a name had once been removed. Ray came up beside her. What did you buy, Nora? She kept staring at the mark. I don't know yet. Across the yard, Grant Voss folded his clipboard under his arm. Near the fence, a man in a gray North Star Seed Genetics polo watched the freezer without blinking. Nora did not notice him. Not then. She only knew that her mother had circled a number. And that number had led her to a dead machine everyone called junk. Bell Farm had never looked like much from the road. It was 43 acres of tired corn ground, a leaning barn, 2 low sheds, and a white farmhouse with paint peeling from the porch rails. In spring, when the ditches filled and the redbuds bloomed along the fence line, strangers sometimes slowed down and said it looked peaceful. Nora knew better. Peaceful was not the same as easy. Her father, Daniel Bell, had died when she was 9, pinned under a cultivator he had been too proud to replace and too broke to repair properly. After that, the farm became something smaller and heavier. Her mother stopped singing in the kitchen. The tractor stayed parked more often than it ran. Bills arrived in white envelopes, then yellow ones, then white ones again with different company names at the top. Lila Bell never complained where Nora could hear it. She simply worked. Most mornings, Lila drove 12 miles to the Mason County Agricultural Research Station before sunrise. She was not a scientist. She did not wear a white coat. Her name was not printed on any folder. She cleaned floors, emptied trash, wiped counters, and locked doors after men with degrees had gone home. Nora remembered waiting for her at night. She remembered headlights turning into the gravel drive long after supper had gone cold. She remembered Lila stepping through the back door with her hair tucked under a faded scarf, her hands cracked from bleach, her coat carrying a smell Nora could never separate from childhood: cold metal, floor wax, and soil dust. But she never brought home anything important. At least, that was what Nora believed. The research station sat behind chain-link fence on the east side of town, surrounded by test plots that changed every year. When Nora was little, she thought the place looked like a farm pretending to be a hospital. She had asked her mother once what happened inside the cold rooms. "Seeds sleep there," Lila had said. Nora had laughed because it sounded like something from a storybook. Lila had not laughed with her. She had only looked toward the station lights and said, "Some things have to be kept alive quietly." That was how Lila spoke when a subject had a door on it. Nora learned not to push. By the time Nora was 16, she understood that her mother carried worries home but not explanations. Lila would stand at the kitchen sink, looking out at the dark fields, rubbing one thumb over the knuckle of her other hand until the skin turned red. If Nora asked what was wrong, Lila would say she was tired. If Nora asked about the station, Lila would say cleaning people heard more than they were supposed to and less than they needed to. Then she would change the subject. There were names Nora heard only in fragments: Delgado, Freeman, Hollis, Mercer. Names spoken when Lila thought Nora was asleep. Names written once on the back of a grocery list and then scratched out so hard the paper tore. Names that appeared in church bulletins, on mailbox posts, on foreclosure notices inside the feed store. Nora did not know they mattered. To her, they were just Mason County names. The kind everybody knew. The kind that showed up at funerals with casseroles and at auctions with folded arms. When Lila got sick, the farm changed again. The house grew quieter, but the bills grew louder. Pill bottles gathered beside the sink. Appointment cards filled the refrigerator door. Nora dropped out of community college after one semester and came home for good, telling everyone it was temporary, though neither she nor her mother believed that. Lila hated needing help. She hated the wheelchair ramp Uncle Ray built off the back porch. She hated that Nora learned to read insurance statements before she was old enough to rent a car. Most of all, she hated the way people started talking over her, as if illness had made her smaller than her own life. Only near the end did she begin reaching for old things. A dented lunch pail from the station, a scarf with bleach spots along the edge, a small tin box that had once held Christmas cookies. Nora found the box 3 days after the funeral, tucked behind flour sacks in the pantry. Inside were ordinary things. Daniel's wedding ring, a photograph of Lila standing beside a row of test corn, 2 grocery receipts, a hospital bracelet, and 1 torn piece of station paperwork. At first, Nora almost threw it away. It looked like nothing. A stained receipt for equipment transfer, the top half missing, the ink faded where someone had folded it again and again. But one line had been circled in blue, Mech, Nijazer sas hetvenkilens chi. Below it, in her mother's uneven late-life handwriting, were 6 words. Do not let them sell it. Nora had sat at the kitchen table until the light changed outside. She wanted the message to feel holy. She wanted it to feel clear. Instead, it felt like one more thing her mother had left, half explained. For weeks, Nora searched old station records and found almost nothing. The research station had closed. Its assets had been transferred, auctioned, or absorbed into North Star Seed Genetics. When Nora called the county office, the clerk told her old surplus paperwork was incomplete. Then the auction notice appeared. Mason County Equipment Liquidation. 3 metal cabinets. Lab stools. Irrigation fittings. 1 non-working seed freezer. Nora saw the inventory number and felt something inside her go cold. Mech, Nijazer sas hetvenkilens. That was why she had gone to the auction with $85 in an envelope meant for the well pump. Not because she understood the freezer. Not because she knew what it held. Not because she was brave in the way people later wanted to say she was. She went because grief has its own kind of obedience. Because her mother had spent her life being ignored by rooms full of people who thought cleaning women did not notice anything. Because if Lila Bell had used the last of her strength to circle a number, Nora could not pretend it meant nothing. Still, as Ray's truck carried the freezer home that afternoon, Nora felt no triumph. Only fear. The machine rocked against its chains with every turn in the road, ugly and silent beneath the sun. In the side mirror, Bell Farm waited in the distance, dry and fragile. The well pump still knocked. The bank still had her file. The south fence still leaned. And behind the freezer's cereal plate, where a name had been scraped away, Nora began to understand that her mother had not left her an answer. She had left her a wound with a handle on it. To open it, Nora would have to start with the thing everyone else had already decided was worthless. Getting the freezer off Ray's truck took nearly an hour. It was heavier than it looked. And it looked heavy enough. Ray backed the truck as close as he could to the small equipment shed behind Bell Farm, then sat there with both hands on the steering wheel, staring at the thing in the bed as if it had personally insulted him. You bought a problem with a door, he said. Nora did not argue. She had no good argument yet. Together, they used 2 chains, a floor jack with 1 bad wheel, and a sheet of plywood that bowed in the middle. The freezer scraped down the boards inch by inch, groaning like something alive and unwilling. When it finally hit the dirt floor of the shed, dust jumped from the rafters. Ray stepped back, breathing hard. There, he said. Your mama's mystery is home. The words were not cruel, but they were tired. Nora understood that tiredness. It lived in the farmhouse walls. It sat in the unpaid envelopes beside the telephone. It rattled in the well pump every time she turned on the kitchen sink. The freezer stood in the shed like it did not belong to any decade Nora had lived through. It was nearly 6 feet tall, wide as a church door, and built with the blunt seriousness of old institutional equipment. The paint had once been white, but years of dust and chemical air had turned it the color of dirty cream. Rust gathered along the hinges. A long dent ran down one side. The handle was steel, not plastic, and cold to the touch even in the afternoon heat. On the front, someone had scraped away the old research station logo. Not peeled, scraped. Nora could see the difference. Peeling left ragged edges. This had been done with pressure, back and forth, until the painted letters vanished into a pale wound on the metal. Below the hinge, the cereal plate still held. Mech Nijazer, sas hetvenkilens, tsi. She wiped it again with the corner of her shirt, though she already knew the number. Ray watched from the doorway. You planning to plug it in? The cord's burned. That's not what I asked. Nora looked at the blackened plug lying against the floor. No, she said. Not yet. Ray gave a humorless laugh. Good. Because I'd hate for the thing to burn down the one shed you still own outright. He left before dusk, telling her twice not to spend money on an electrician. Nora waited until his truck disappeared down the drive before she opened the freezer. The door resisted at first. The cracked rubber seal clung to the frame, dry and stubborn. When it finally broke loose, the sound was soft and unpleasant, like old tape pulling away from skin. The smell that came out was not rot. That surprised her. She had expected mold, spoiled grain, maybe the sour odor of dead mice. Instead, the freezer smelled like metal, dust, and something faintly sharp, almost like the inside of the research station hallway she remembered from childhood. Cold rooms. Seeds sleep there. The shelves inside were mostly gone. 2 wire racks remained, bent downward from weight long removed. The floor held a shallow line of dried mineral stain. Along the back wall, a square panel had been bolted into place. Nora frowned. The panel did not match the rest of the freezer. Its metal was slightly duller. The screws were different too. 3 had flatheads worn smooth with age, but the 4th was newer, brighter, and set at an angle. Someone had opened that panel after the freezer was built. Maybe more than once. Nora ran her fingers along the seam. At the lower right corner, she found a thin line of wax. Not grease. Not caulk. Wax. She stepped back and looked at the whole machine again. For the first time since the auction, the freezer seemed less like junk and more like a locked room. The next morning, she called Callum Price, the only electrician in Mason County who still answered his phone before 7. He came after lunch, took one look at the cord, and shook his head. No, you haven't even opened the back. I don't need to. Nora crossed her arms. It came from the research station. That station closed for a reason. What reason? Callum wiped his hands on his jeans, though he had not touched anything. Reasons above my rate. He did open the service panel before leaving, but only because Nora stood there and waited. Behind it, the wiring was old, cloth wrapped in places, brittle in others. The compressor housing was stained. A fuse had blown hard enough to scorch the casing, but near the bottom, tucked behind a shield plate, there was a small brass dial. Callum stopped. What is that? I thought you knew. He leaned closer. Mechanical backup gauge, maybe. Haven't seen one like that in years. The needle rested on 0. Nora reached toward it, but Callum caught her wrist. Don't force anything. I wasn't. You were thinking about it. She pulled her hand back. Callum straightened. My advice? Sell it for parts. To who? He looked at the serial plate, then away. Somebody who wants old station parts. That answer was too careful. After he left, Nora stayed in the shed with the door open and the late sun falling across the freezer's side. Outside, the first signs of heat stress were beginning to show in the low field. Corn leaves that should have spread wide in June had started to curl inward, thin as blades. Every farmer in Mason County knew that look. They just did not panic over it yet. Weather turned, forecasts changed. Corn suffered and came back. That was what people told themselves at the beginning. Nora knelt in front of the freezer and studied the brass gauge. It had no brand name, only 3 tiny marks scratched into the rim, one at 0, one at 41, one below that, almost hidden under tarnish. Hull under innafür. She did not know why those words came into her mind. Maybe because her mother's handwriting had trained her to notice numbers. Maybe because grief made patterns where none existed. Or maybe because Lila Bell had known exactly which machine her daughter would one day open. Nora reached behind the shield plate and found a small crank folded flat against the housing. This time, no one stopped her. She pulled it outward. The metal resisted. Then it gave. When she turned the crank once, the freezer made no sound. No motor started. No cold air moved. Nothing magical happened. But the brass needle trembled. Just once. Then it lifted a hair above 0. Nora froze. Outside, the well pump knocked from inside its little shed, a dry, uneven sound. Beyond it, the cornfield held still under the heat. Inside the dead freezer, the needle remained slightly raised, as if something old had not awakened yet, but had heard her knocking. Nora closed the service panel carefully. She no longer believed her mother had left her a piece of junk. But she also no longer believed she had left her something simple. And the next step would not be asking what the freezer was worth. It would be finding out who had been afraid enough to hide something inside it. Nora spent the next 2 mornings trying to open the back panel. She did not have the right tools for old institutional equipment. She had a socket set missing 2 sizes, a flathead screwdriver with a cracked handle, a pair of pliers her father had wrapped in electrical tape 20 years ago, and more stubbornness than skill. The freezer did not care. The first screw stripped before breakfast. The second would not move at all. The third turned halfway, then froze with a sound that made Nora close her eyes and breathe through her teeth. By noon, her shirt was stuck to her back, her knuckles were scraped, and the brass gauge had not moved again. The freezer stood silent in the shed, giving her nothing. Outside, the heat pressed down on Bell Farm with the steady weight of a hand. The corn in the low field had begun curling more tightly, not dying yet, not fully, just warning anyone who knew how to look. Nora knew how to look. She only did not know how to fix any of it. On the 3rd morning, she dragged the freezer closer to the shed doorway for better light. That was when Buck Harlan's truck slowed on the road. It did not stop at first. Then it did. Buck leaned one arm out the window, looking past Nora at the freezer. "Well, I'll be," he called. "You got it running yet?" Nora kept working. His brother, seated beside him, laughed. "Maybe she's waiting for it to hatch." Nora pressed the screwdriver harder into the screwhead. Buck nodded toward the cornfield. "You might want to spend your time on that crop instead of playing scientist." That made her look up. "I'm not playing anything." Buck smiled, but there was less humor in it now. "Your mother cleaned at that station. That doesn't mean it left you a degree." The words landed exactly where he meant them to. Nora straightened slowly. For a moment, she wanted to throw the screwdriver at his truck. Instead, she wiped her hands on her jeans and said, "Good thing I'm not asking you to read the manual." Buck's smile disappeared. His brother laughed once, but quietly this time. They drove off in a cloud of dust, and Nora hated herself for how badly her hands shook afterward. That afternoon, Grant Voss arrived from the bank. He parked beside the house instead of the shed, which Nora understood immediately. Men like Grant did not walk straight toward the problem. They started where paperwork lived. He wore a pale blue shirt, sleeves rolled neatly to the forearm, and carried a folder under one arm. He was young enough to remember being underestimated and old enough to have learned how to hide it. "Nora," he said, "I wanted to talk before the review meeting next week." She stood on the porch, still dirty from the shed. "About the loan, about the restructuring request," he corrected gently. That was bank language, a softer word for the same knife. Grant glanced past her toward the equipment shed. The freezer was visible in the doorway. "I have to ask," he said, "was that purchase necessary for farm operations?" Nora almost laughed. "Necessary. The well pump was necessary. Seed was necessary. Diesel was necessary. Fence wire was necessary. A dead freezer from a closed research station was not necessary unless a dying woman had circled its number and left it like a commandment. But Nora could not put that on a bank form. "It might be," she said. Grant sighed. "I'm not here to insult you. You wrote it down at the auction." His face changed just slightly. "I wrote down what I observed. Same thing, from where I was standing." Grant looked away first. That surprised her. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "The bank needs to see a credible plan. Receipts. Repair estimates. Crop projections. If this farm is going to stay out of foreclosure, I need something I can defend." Nora looked toward the shed. "What if I'm trying to find that?" Grant followed her eyes. "In that freezer?" She did not answer. He closed the folder. "Then find it fast." After he left, Nora drove to the county records office with the serial number written on the back of an envelope. The clerk behind the counter was named Mrs. Danner, and she had been guarding files since Nora was in middle school. She listened to Nora's question, typed slowly, frowned, typed again, and then shook her head. "Research station assets were transferred in batches," she said. "To who?" "Some to county surplus, some to state archive. Most equipment records went with the buyer." "What buyer?" Mrs. Danner hesitated. Nora noticed. "North Star Seed Genetics," the clerk said finally. "But I doubt they'll release anything. Private acquisition." Nora slid the envelope forward. "Can you at least tell me what this item was used for?" Mrs. Danner looked at the number, then at Nora. For 1 second, something like recognition crossed her face. Then it vanished. "I don't have access to that file." But there is a file. I didn't say that. You kind of did. Mrs. Danner pushed the envelope back. Go home, Nora. It was not rude. It was worse. It sounded like fear. When Nora returned to Bell Farm, a gray sedan sat near the shed. A man in a pressed polo shirt stood beside the freezer, not touching it, but studying it closely. His shirt carried the North Star Seed Genetics logo in green thread. Nora stopped the truck hard enough that gravel jumped. Can I help you? The man turned with a practiced smile. Miss Bell? Adrian Pike. North Star Regional Assets. Get away from my shed. He lifted both hands slightly. Of course. I apologize. Your uncle said you might be here. My uncle doesn't own this farm. No, you do. His smile stayed in place. For now, Nora felt the air change. Adrian looked back at the freezer. I understand you purchased an old cold storage unit at county auction. You understand a lot for someone I didn't call. Old research equipment can create liability. Chemical residue. Contamination. Improper storage history. North Star prefers to recover certain legacy items before they become a burden to private citizens. Aborden. Yes. Nora walked past him and stood between him and the freezer. How much? Adrian seemed pleased, she asked. $1,500. The number should have sounded good. It did not. It sounded too quick. The auction had ended 3 days ago. She had paid $85. The county clerk had barely said North Star's name, and now a man from the company was standing on her farm, offering nearly 20 times what she paid for something everyone else called scrap. Nora crossed her arms. Why? Adrian glanced at the cereal plate. Not the freezer. The cereal plate. MCS4179C was part of a discontinued storage series, he said. We track what we can. Nora went still. She had not told him the number. Adrian must have seen the realization, because his smile faded at the edges. We can have it removed by tomorrow, he said. Cashier's check. No trouble for you. And if I say no? His eyes moved once toward the cornfield, then back to her. I'd advise against creating trouble you can't afford. Nora heard the well pump knock from its shed, dry and uneven. She heard Grant's voice. Find it fast. She heard her mother's handwriting without sound. Do not let them sell it. Nora reached behind her and pulled the shed door shut until it hit the freezer's side. No, she said. Adrian studied her for a moment, then handed her a business card. Think carefully, Miss Bell. After he drove away, Nora stood alone in the shed with the freezer and the card in her hand. The first attempt had given her no seeds, no answers, and no proof. Only a stripped screw, a frightened clerk, a banker's deadline, and a company that knew the serial number before she spoke it. For the first time, Nora understood that the freezer was not just something her mother wanted saved. It was something someone else had been trying to find. And if she wanted to know why, she would have to open the panel before North Star found another way to take it. Nora stopped trying to force the stripped screw. That was the first smart thing she did. For 3 days, she had treated the freezer like a broken machine that needed strength. After Adrian Pike left his card on her workbench, she began treating it like something that had survived because someone had been careful. So she slowed down. She set the card face down under a coffee mug. She borrowed a hand drill from Ray without telling him why. She found a jar of penetrating oil behind her father's old tool chest and worked it into the frozen screws 1 drop at a time. Then she waited. Waiting was harder than prying. Outside, the heat deepened. The fields around Bell Farm took on a dull, tired color, not brown yet, but no longer green enough to comfort anyone. The weather radio used the words prolonged heat dome. The crop consultant on the local morning show said there was no reason to panic. Nora turned it off. On the 4th evening, with the shed doors open and mosquitoes gathering in the corners, the first screw finally moved. Not much, just enough. Nora held her breath and turned again. The screw came loose with a dry squeal. The second followed after 10 minutes. The third broke at the head, but by then the panel had enough give for her to slide the flathead under one edge. The wax seam cracked. A smell came out. Not rot. Not chemicals. Paper. Old paper. Wax, metal, and cold dust. Nora pulled the panel back carefully and found a narrow space behind the freezer wall, no wider than her forearm. At first, she saw only insulation yellowed with age. Then her flashlight caught something wrapped in wax cloth and tied with brittle string. Her hands went still. She thought of her mother's voice. Seeds, sleep there. Nora untied the string, as if it might break the past open too quickly. Inside, the waxcloth was a plastic sleeve. Inside that was a small paper packet, folded twice and sealed along the edge. Most of the label had been scratched away, but not all of it. M. T. Blas. Dry line. Håll under innanför. Below that, in pencil so faint she had to tilt it toward the light, were 3 letters. Le. Be. Nora sat back on her heels. Lila Belle. For a moment, the shed seemed to lose sound. Even the well pump, which had been knocking all afternoon, went quiet between strokes. Nora did not open the packet. She wanted to. Every part of her wanted to pour whatever was inside into her palm and know, finally, what her mother had saved. But she remembered the temperature mark on the gauge. Håll under innanför. Instead, she put the packet inside a clean mason jar, wrapped the jar in a towel, and carried it to the refrigerator in the farmhouse like it was something wounded. The next morning, Nora drove to the far side of Mason County to see Samuel Pike. People still called him an extension agent, though he had retired 12 years earlier. He lived in a brick house with rain barrels under the gutters and tomato cages lined up straighter than fence posts. Nora found him in the side yard, tying twine around a row of pepper plants that looked healthier than anything else in the county. He was thin, white-haired, and careful with his hands. When Nora told him she had come about the old research station, he did not invite her inside. When she showed him the packet through the glass jar, his face changed. Not surprise, recognition, then fear. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "My mother left me the serial number of a freezer." Samuel looked toward the road, then back at the jar. "Lila's girl," he said softly. Nora tightened her grip. "You knew my mother?" Everybody knew Lila. Most just didn't understand what she noticed. "What is M13? Samuel did not answer. The silence stretched until Nora felt anger rising through her fear. "Mr. Pike, North Star already came to my farm. They offered me money. They knew the serial number. The bank is circling. My crop is starting to curl. If you know what this is, I need you to stop acting like silence is protection." That reached him. His eyes closed for a moment. "M13 was part of a dry line trial," he said. "Not official, not by the time it mattered." "What does that mean?" "It means there were seeds that should have been cataloged under family contributions. Old lines. Local lines. Things people kept alive in coffee cans, sheds, freezer bags, church basements." He looked at the jar again. After the drought years, families brought samples to the station. They thought they were helping build something for the county. And did they? Samuel's mouth tightened. They built something. He would not say more. Not yet. But when Nora tried to hand him the jar, he stepped back as if it were hot. "No, don't leave it with me." "Why?" "Because I was there long enough to know better, and quiet long enough to be ashamed of it." The words struck Nora harder than she expected. Samuel walked to his shed and returned with a small paper envelope, a pair of tweezers, and a warning. "If there are kernels in there, don't waste them. Don't plant them in open ground. Use trays, shade cloth, keep records, photograph everything, and don't call North Star again. I didn't call them the first time. That's what worries me." Back at Bell Farm, Nora waited until the kitchen was clean and the windows had gone dark. Then she opened the packet. 13 kernels lay inside. They did not look magical. They looked smaller than she expected. Pale gold with a reddish mark near the tip. One had cracked slightly. Another looked too dry to ever become anything. Nora touched none of them with her fingers. Using Samuel's tweezers, she placed 4 kernels into starter trays filled with soil from the shaded edge of the old garden. She labeled each cell carefully. M13. Packet A. Bell Farm. Heat test. Then she set the tray near the well house, under a piece of shade cloth, where the air stayed hot but not direct enough to cook the soil. For 2 days, nothing happened. On the 3rd, Buck Harlan drove by without slowing. The well pump knocked. The weather radio announced another week of dangerous heat. Grant Voss left a voicemail Nora did not play. On the 4th morning, Nora went outside before sunrise with a cup of coffee she had forgotten to drink. The tray looked unchanged at first. Then she saw it. One thin green hook had broken through the soil. Not tall. Not strong. Not enough to save anything. But alive. Nora knelt in the dirt beside the well house as the first light came over the low field. By noon, a second shoot had appeared. By evening, a third had lifted its head from the soil, while corn across the road curled tighter in the heat. Nora photographed each one. She wrote the time. She wrote the temperature. She wrote the soil condition. Then, beneath all of it, she wrote the sentence she had been afraid to believe. Mom was right. But the moment she finished writing, she understood something else. If 4 colonels could do this in a heat wave, then Adrian Pike had not offered her $1,500 because the freezer was dangerous. He had offered it because he was afraid of what would grow. And before Nora could decide what to do with that first green proof, she would have to learn how many names had been buried with it. By the second week of the heat wave, Mason County stopped joking about the weather. The radio no longer called it unusual. The extension office no longer used words like temporary stress. On the morning news, a map of the Midwest glowed red across the screen, and the county weather alert warned people not to work outside past noon unless they had no choice. Farmers always had no choice. By sunrise, trucks were already moving along gravel roads, checking irrigation lines, walking fields, calling consultants, pretending numbers could soften what their eyes already knew. Corn leaves had curled tight enough to look like green wire. The soil cracked in the low spots. Dust hung over the roads long after vehicles passed. At Bell Farm, Nora walked the rows before breakfast and felt the old helplessness rise in her chest. Her own corn was suffering, too. The M13 tray was the only thing that looked like it had not heard the bad news. She kept it near the well house under shade cloth, where the air stayed brutally hot but the soil did not bake directly. Each morning, she photographed the shoots, checked the temperature, measured their height with a ruler, and wrote everything in a notebook. By the 6th day, all 4 planted kernels had sprouted. By the 8th, 3 were upright and deepening in color. By the 10th, while the field corn around her farm twisted into thin, thirsty blades, the M13 seedlings had opened their first true leaves. Nora did not let herself call it a miracle. Miracles were too easy. This was evidence. She sent the photos to Samuel Pike. He called 20 minutes later. "You planted 4?" he asked. "Yes." "How many came up?" "All 4. 1 week, 3 strong." Samuel was quiet long enough that Nora checked whether the call had dropped. Then he said, "I'm coming over." He arrived before noon with a straw hat, a clipboard, and the expression of a man walking back into a room he had avoided for decades. He did not go to the house. He went straight to the well shed. When he saw the tray, he stopped. The plants were not tall. They were not impressive to anyone who did not know what heat did to young corn. But Samuel knew. He crouched slowly, touched the edge of one leaf without bending it, and swallowed. "I thought they destroyed all of it," he said. Nora stood behind him. "All of what?" He looked at the field beyond the shed. "The dryline project. You said that before." "I said part of it." Samuel took off his hat and held it in both hands. After the drought in the late 70s, the station started collecting local seed lines. Not commercial stock. Family seed. Old corn people had saved through bad years. Some from bottomland farms. Some from dry ridges. Some from families who had nothing except coffee cans of seed their grandparents kept. Nora remembered the names her mother had whispered. Delgado, Freeman, Hollis, Mercer. Samuel nodded as if she had spoken them aloud. "They brought those seeds because they trusted the station," he said. "They were told the county was building a public resilience line, something local farmers could use if another hard drought came. And M. Tretton, one of the strongest crosses." His voice lowered. "Maybe the strongest." Nora looked at the tray. The little plants trembled in the hot wind coming through the open shed door. "So North Star owns it?" Samuel did not answer quickly enough. "That's what they say," he said. "What does that mean?" "It means paper can be made to say things hands never agreed to." Nora felt a coldness move through her despite the heat. Samuel looked at her then, and for the first time he seemed less afraid of North Star than of himself. "I signed off on some transfer summaries when the station was closing. I was told the original contribution records were incomplete. I was told there was nothing useful left to protect. I wanted to believe that because believing it made leaving easier." "Did my mother know?" His face tightened. "Lila saw things the rest of us stepped around." That was not an answer. It was close enough to hurt. After Samuel left, Nora went back to the freezer. She did not know what she was searching for anymore. Proof, maybe. Or permission. Or some piece of her mother that would explain why a cleaning woman had hidden a seed packet behind the wall of a broken machine. The first compartment had given her M13. The back cavity still held more insulation. This time she worked without rushing. She cut along the waxed seam with a utility knife and peeled the yellowed material back in strips. Dust stuck to the sweat on her arms. The shed felt airless. Twice, she had to step outside and breathe. Near the upper corner, her knife hit something flat. She stopped. Inside, the insulation was a folded sheet wrapped in plastic so old it cracked at the edges when she touched it. Moisture had gotten in anyway. The paper inside was stained brown along one side, and some of the ink had bled into soft blue shadows. Nora carried it to the kitchen table and opened it under the ceiling fan. At the top, she could make out Mason County Dryline Contribution Log. Below that were columns: family name, seed source, acreage origin, condition notes, transfer, authorization. Some entries were unreadable. Others were not. Delgado Ridge corn, 1,962 drought survivor. Freeman red tip field line, held through 3 failed seasons. Hollis Church cellar sample, unregistered. Mercer lowland yellow dent, heat stress recovery noted. Then one line made Nora stop breathing. Bell cleaning staff witness initials, LB, not owner, not contributor. Witness, her mother had not been trying to claim the seed. She had been trying to prove who had brought it. Nora pressed one hand to the table. For the first time since the auction, the freezer was no longer a mystery she owned. It was a room full of other people's names, and she had only opened the door. The phone rang before she could read further. Unknown number. She almost let it go. Then she answered. "Miss Bell," Adrian Pike said, "I understand you've been speaking with Samuel." Nora's skin tightened. "You're watching my phone now?" "No. Mason County is small. Not small enough for you to know what happens on my farm." A pause. Then Adrian's voice softened into something polished and dangerous. "We may have started poorly. North Star is prepared to make a serious offer for the freezer and any legacy materials found inside it." "How serious?" $600,000. Nora said nothing. The kitchen fan clicked overhead. $600,000. Enough to pay the bank. Enough to replace the well pump, fix the roof, repair the south fence, buy seed for next year, and stop waking every morning with foreclosure sitting at the edge of the bed. Adrian continued. The agreement would include standard confidentiality language. You would transfer possession of the unit, all internal contents, all notes or samples removed from it, and refrain from public discussion of discontinued station materials. Nda, if you prefer that term. Nora looked down at the log sheet. At the names, Ot L. B. Why would you pay that much for junk? Adrian did not laugh. That was how she knew the answer mattered. Because junk becomes expensive when people misunderstand it. No, Nora said quietly. You're afraid people will understand it. For the first time, Adrian had no immediate reply. When he spoke again, the friendliness was gone. Miss Bell, I'd think very carefully. A farm in default has limited room for symbolic gestures. The line went dead. Nora stayed at the table long after the call ended. Outside, the heat pressed against the windows. In the tray by the well house, 4 small plants were still alive. On the table, the log sheet lay open beneath her hand. She had wanted proof her mother was right. Now she had it. But the proof came with a price large enough to save everything she owned if she was willing to let every other name stay buried. And by morning, she would learn North Star was not the only one ready to use the law against her. The legal notice arrived the next morning in a white envelope too clean for a farm mailbox. Nora found it wedged between a seed catalog and the electric bill, stamped with North Star Seed Genetics across the top left corner. For a moment, she stood at the end of the driveway holding it, listening to the heat hiss through the roadside grass. She knew before she opened it, people did not send clean envelopes to bring peace. The letter was 4 pages long, written in language that made simple things sound dangerous. It stated that certain materials originating from the Mason County Agricultural Research Station remained subject to corporate asset recovery. It warned that biological samples, experimental seed lines, research logs, storage equipment, and derivative notes could constitute proprietary property. Proprietary. Nora read the word 3 times. Then came the sentence that made her sit down on the porch step. Failure to preserve, return, or disclose possession of such materials may result in civil action. The freezer sat in the shed behind her house. The M13 tray, stood beside the well house, 4 small green plants trembling under shade cloth. The log sheet lay inside a cereal box on her kitchen shelf because she had not been able to think of a safer place. All at once, Bell Farm felt too open, too easy to enter, too poor to defend. By noon, Grant Voss called. Nora almost did not answer, but avoiding the bank never made the bank disappear. "I received a notification this morning," Grant said, "from North Star. A pause." "Yes. They move fast. They have counsel," he said carefully. "Nora, this creates a complication for the restructuring review." She laughed once without humor. "A complication. Legal uncertainty around farm assets can affect the bank's position. The freezer isn't collateral. No, but litigation can affect your financial standing, your operating plan, your risk profile." There it was again. Bank language. Soft cloth wrapped around a stone. Grant's voice lowered. "I'm not telling you what to do, but if there is an offer on the table that would clear your arrears, you think I should take it. I think you need to understand what refusing it costs." Nora looked out at the low field, where the corn had begun to dull at the edges, like paper left too close to flame. "I understand cost." "No," Grant said quietly. "I'm not sure you do yet." After the call ended, Nora sat at the kitchen table with the North Star letter in front of her and Adrian Pike's business card beside it. $600,000 had sounded impossible the day before. Now it sounded like shelter. Ray came over near evening, carrying a bag of pump fittings she knew he could not afford any more than she could. He did not speak when she handed him the letter. He read it slowly, lips pressed thin. When he finished, he set it on the table with care. "Take the money," he said. Nora stared at him. "You don't even know what's in the freezer." "I know what's outside it." Ray tapped the letter. "Lawyers, bankers, a company with more money than this whole road. You can't fight that with 4 seedlings and your mama's handwriting. She hid it for a reason." "I believe that." His voice cracked slightly. "I do. But believing Lila had a reason doesn't mean you have to burn your life down proving it." The words hit harder because there was no cruelty in them, only fear. Ray sat across from her, suddenly looking older than he had at the auction. "Your mother spent half her life trying to keep you from going without," he said. "If she knew that freezer could save this farm, she wrote, 'Do not let them sell it.' She didn't write, 'Lose everything for it.'" Nora looked away. For the first time, she hated that he might be right. Ray reached across the table but did not touch her hand. "If North Star wants to bury something, let them pay you enough to survive. That's not weakness, that's living." Nora thought of the names on the log. Delgado, Freeman, Hollis, Mercer, Bell only as witness. What if surviving means helping them erase people? Ray had no answer for that. Later that night, Samuel Pike came to the farm without calling. He parked his old truck near the shed and waited until Nora stepped outside. His face looked drawn in the porch light, and he held his hat against his chest like a man arriving at a funeral. "I heard about the notice," he said. "From who?" "Mason County is small." Nora almost told him she was tired of that sentence. Instead, she led him to the shed. The freezer stood in the dark, its service panel half open, its scraped logo pale under her flashlight. Samuel looked at it for a long time. "My brother worked under the station director," he said finally. Nora turned. "You have a brother?" "Had. Clayton Pike, Adrian's grandfather." The name settled between them. "Pike. Of course." Samuel swallowed. Clayton handled transfer paperwork when North Star began negotiating for station assets. He believed public research was dying, and private money was the only way anything survived. Maybe he was right about some of it. Maybe that's what made the rest easier. The rest? Samuel's eyes moved to the freezer. Contribution records were supposed to stay with the county. The seed samples could be licensed, studied, multiplied, but the origin records were not supposed to disappear. Those family names mattered. Without them, North Star could claim the line came from discontinued station stock. "And you knew." "I suspected." "That's not an answer." "No," Samuel said. "It's a confession with its spine missing." Nora felt her anger rise, but beneath it was something worse. Fear. "What about my mother?" Samuel closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked older. Lila found things in trash bins that were not trash, draft logs, carbon copies, labels peeled from storage trays. She asked questions she had no position to ask. Did she steal the freezer? The question came out before Nora could stop it. Samuel did not answer quickly. That silence changed everything. Nora stepped back from him. Tell me. I don't know that she stole it. That isn't no. I know she moved something before the final transfer. Maybe a packet. Maybe records. Maybe more. She told me once that if the right people would not protect the proof, the wrong person would have to. Nora's throat tightened. The wrong person. A cleaning woman. Her mother. North Star's legal notice flashed through her mind. Possession, return, civil action. If Lila had hidden the freezer, North Star could call her a thief. Mason County could remember her, not as the woman who worked nights with cracked hands, but as someone who took company property. Nora gripped the edge of the workbench. She was trying to help. I believe that. Believing won't matter if they put it in court language. Samuel had no defense against that. Outside, heat lightning flickered far beyond the fields, too distant to bring rain. The corn leaves whispered dryly in the dark. Nora looked at the freezer, then at the tray of living seedlings beyond the shed door. Until that night, she had thought the choice was money or truth. Now she understood the truth might not arrive clean. It might drag her mother's name through every dirty thing the company could say about her. It might cost Nora the farm, and still fail to save the families in the log. It might turn the last instruction Lila Bell ever left into evidence against her. Samuel spoke softly. There may be more inside. Nora looked back at him. What more? If Lila hid the packet, she may have hidden why. The freezer stood between them, silent and scarred. Nora picked up the utility knife from the workbench. Her hands were no longer shaking. Then we opened the rest. And this time, she was not looking for seeds. She was looking for the truth that could either clear her mother's name or destroy what was left of it. They opened the freezer after midnight, not because midnight made the work safer, but because Nora could not bear the thought of waiting until morning. The legal notice sat folded on the kitchen table. Adrian Pike's card lay beside it. Outside, the heat held to the dark like it had nowhere else to go. Samuel brought two things from his truck, a small crowbar wrapped in cloth, and a file box filled with old station forms he said he should have shown someone years ago. Nora did not ask why he had waited. Not yet. Together, they pulled the freezer away from the shed wall and removed the remaining screws from the rear casing. This time, Samuel worked slowly, almost reverently, as if the metal itself might testify if they did not scare it. Behind the insulation, they found another wax seam. Vita. Cleaner. Hidden beneath a second layer of yellowed padding was a flat metal envelope, sealed with old tape and marked in black pencil. Cold Room B, Cleaning Access Panel. Nora looked at Samuel. He whispered, Lila. The tape cracked when Nora lifted it. Inside were three things: a full contribution log, a folded cleaning schedule, and a letter sealed in a plain envelope with Nora's name written across the front. Not Miss Bell. Not to whom it may concern. Nora. Her hands went cold before she even opened it. Samuel looked away. Read the records first. She almost asked why. Then she saw the log. Unlike the damaged sheet she had found earlier, this one was dry, protected, and complete. Across the top, the station name had been typed cleanly. Mason County Dryline Contribution Log Original Field Sources. Below it, line after line carried the kind of history no company brochure ever printed. Delgado Ridge corn held through 1,962 drought, family storage, no commercial release. Freeman Red Tip Field Line, saved from failed bottomland crop, transferred for public county trial. Hollis Church Cellar Sample, Women's Preserving Club, unregistered but accepted by station. Mercer, Lowland Yellow Dent, heat recovery noted, contribution witnessed. Other names followed. Aldridge, Rusk, Bell, not as owner, not as breeder, not as scientist. Bell appeared in the witness column again and again. Lebe. Nora's mother had not signed as someone claiming the seed. She had signed as someone watching it arrive. Samuel opened his file box and laid out transfer summaries beside the log. The difference was immediate. On the original log, family names filled the page. On the transfer summaries, those names were gone. Where Delgado had been, the typed form read, Station Line D4. Where Freeman had been, it read, Internal Trial Material. Where Hollis had been, it read, Unattributed Storage Sample. Where Mercer had been, it read, Discontinued Research Stock. The people had been turned into categories. The categories had been turned into assets, and the assets had been sold. Nora stared at the two sets of papers until the words blurred. They erased them, she said. Samuel's face folded inward. Yes. North Star? North Star bought what the paperwork said existed. His voice was thin, but men at the station made the paperwork clean enough to sell. Clayton Pike. Samuel nodded once. And others. You? He closed his eyes. I did not type those forms. I did not order the names removed. He opened his eyes again, and there was no defense left in them, but I saw summaries that didn't match what I remembered. I told myself the originals were somewhere else. I told myself public research was collapsing, and if private money kept the seed alive, maybe that was better than losing it all. Nora's anger rose, then broke against the letter in her hand. Because Samuel's shame was not the deepest thing in the room. Her mother's handwriting was. She opened the envelope. The letter was 4 pages long, written in uneven lines that worsened near the end, as if Lila had written it across several nights when her hands still obeyed her in pieces. Nora, if you are reading this, then I was not brave enough to tell you while I was living. That first sentence nearly took Nora down. She sat on an overturned feed bucket. Samuel stayed silent. Lila wrote that she had found the first discarded label in a trash bin outside Cold Room B. It had a family name on it, then a station code written over it. At first, she thought it was ordinary relabeling. Then she found carbon copies in the cleaning room. Contribution sheets. Draft summaries. A memo that used the phrase origin names unnecessary for transfer. She wrote that she asked Clayton Pike why the families were not listed. He told her cleaning staff should not read what they emptied. A week later, the labeled trays began disappearing. Lila copied what she could. She hid labels in her lunch pail. She kept schedules showing who entered Cold Room B and when. When she realized the freezer marked MCS4179C still held packets from the dryline trial, she changed the cleaning schedule so she could access the room after closing. Nora stopped reading and pressed the paper against her mouth. Samuel whispered. She wasn't stealing for herself. Nora kept reading. Lila wrote that she had moved the freezer during the final equipment shuffle, not to sell it, not to claim it, but because the original contribution log had been placed inside its rear panel by someone who knew the records would vanish. She did not know who at first. Then one night she found a note taped behind the gauge. Lila, if they clear the files, keep the cold one. Names are in the wall. The note was signed only SP. Nora looked up slowly. Samuel was crying. I wrote it, he said. The shed seemed to tilt around her. You told her to take it? I told her to keep it from transfer. I was too afraid to do it myself. Nora stood. For a moment, she could not speak. All these years, Samuel had carried himself like a witness. But he had been more than that. He had known enough to warn Lila, then let the cleaning woman take the risk he had been too frightened to carry. Samuel did not ask forgiveness. That was the only reason Nora did not hate him completely. Lila's letter continued. I waited too long, baby. That is the truth I do not get to soften. I was scared of losing my job. I was scared of losing insurance. I was scared they would say I stole from the station, and no one would believe a woman with a mop over men with titles. Nora's eyes filled, but she kept reading. But those families brought seed because they believed it would help everybody. If those names disappear, then the seed becomes money for people who never carried it through a bad year. I could not stop that when I should have. So I kept what I could. The final page was shorter. If you find this, do not let them make it about me. I was wrong to wait. Samuel was wrong to hide. Clayton was wrong to erase. But the seed is not the sin. The seed belongs to the hands that kept it alive. And if they offer you money, remember this. A farm can be lost in one. A name can be lost forever. Nora lowered the letter. For a long time, the only sound was the dry ticking of insects against the shed light. The truth had not cleared her mother completely. That hurt most. Lila had waited. Lila had hidden evidence. Lila had let fear decide too many years. But she had not stolen to profit. She had protected proof when everyone with more power had found reasons not to. Nora looked at the original log again. Each name was now heavier than money. Delgado, Freeman, Hollis, Mercer, Aldridge, Rusk. Dozens more. The reveal did not fix anything. It made everything harder. If Nora gave the records to North Star, Bell Farm could survive, and her mother's name might stay quiet. If she released them, North Star would attack Lila, Samuel, maybe anyone connected to the old station. The bank might still foreclose. The lawsuit might take years. The families might be hurt before they were helped. But for the first time, Nora understood what her mother had truly left her. Not a treasure, not a shortcut, a responsibility. She folded the letter and placed it beside the log. Then she looked at Samuel. "You're going to tell them." His face paled. "Who?" "The families." "Nora." "No." Her voice did not rise, but it stopped him. "You let my mother carry your courage once. You don't get to do that twice." Samuel bowed his head. Outside, the heat lightning flickered again, still too far away to break the drought. In the tray near the well house, the M13 seedlings stood in the dark, small and alive, carrying names almost no one knew they owed. By morning, Nora would call the families in the log. Not North Star, not the bank, the families. And once those names were spoken aloud, no amount of money would be enough to make them disappear again. Nora did not call the newspaper. She did not call a lawyer first. She did not call Adrian Pike. At 7 the next morning, with Lila's letter folded beside the original contribution log, Nora opened the county directory and began calling the names her mother had protected. Delgado, Freeman, Hollis, Mercer, Aldridge, Rusk. Some numbers no longer worked. Some families had moved. Some voices on the other end went quiet when Nora said Mason County Agricultural Research Station. A few thought she was trying to sell something. One man hung up before she finished the sentence. But by late afternoon, trucks began turning into Bell Farm. They parked along the drive, beside the leaning fence, under the walnut tree, near the empty fuel tank. They came in work shirts, church dresses, mechanic uniforms, faded caps, and dusty boots. Not a crowd large enough for cameras. Just enough people to make the yard feel like it was holding its breath. Ray stood near the porch, arms folded, watching them arrive. He had not tried to stop Nora that morning. That was his first apology. The second came when Mrs. Delgado stepped out of her son's truck using a cane and asked, "Is this about my father's red corn?" Nora looked at the log in her hands. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "I think it is." They gathered in the equipment shed because that was where the freezer stood. The thing that had been mocked at auction now sat under two hanging lights, scarred and open, its back panel removed, its hidden cavity exposed. No one laughed. Nora placed copies of the log on Ray's workbench. She did not make speeches. She only read enough for each family to hear their name in the record. Delgado Ridge corn held through 1,962 drought. Freeman red tip field line. Hollis church cellar sample. Mercer heat recovery noted. Each name changed the room. Mrs. Delgado covered her mouth. A Freeman grandson stared at the paper as if it might move. Mr. Hollis whispered, "My grandmother said they took jars from the church cellar. I thought she was just telling old stories." Nora looked at Samuel. He stood near the shed door, hat in both hands, face gray with the weight of being seen. For a moment, she thought he might run from it again. He did not. Samuel stepped forward. "I owe every family here the truth," he said. The room turned toward him. He told them he had worked at the station. He told them he had known enough to question the transfer summaries. He told them he had written the note that sent Lila Bell to protect the freezer, then let her carry the risk he was too afraid to take. No one interrupted him. That made it worse. "I cannot undo what I helped by silence," Samuel said. "But I can sign a sworn statement. I can identify the transfer forms. I can testify that the original contribution records named your families." His voice broke only once. When he said Lila's name, Nora looked down. She had expected anger from the families. There was some. She saw it in stiff shoulders, wet eyes, hands gripping folded paper too tightly. But there was something else, too. Recognition. They knew fear. They knew waiting too long. They knew what it meant to keep quiet because the people with money had buildings, lawyers, and letterhead. Mrs. Delgado spoke first. "Your mother kept the names," she said to Nora. "That matters." Nora could not answer. Ray turned away and wiped his face with the heel of his hand. Later, when people moved outside for air, he came to stand beside her near the freezer. "I was wrong," he said. Nora kept her eyes on the yard. "You were scared." "I was scared," Ray said. "But I made it sound like your mama left you a burden instead of a job." He swallowed. "She knew you better than I did." Nora shook her head. "She left me something I almost didn't understand. But you didn't sell it." Ray looked toward the families gathered under the walnut tree. "That counts." Before sunset, Grant Voss arrived. Nora saw him park and felt her stomach tighten. But he did not bring a foreclosure packet. He brought a folder and a face that had lost some of its bank office polish. "I can't make the loan disappear," he said before she asked. "And I can't promise what the committee will do." "Then why are you here?" Grant opened the folder. "I filed a temporary review hold this afternoon. 30 days. Maybe 45 if I can justify the asset dispute." He glanced toward the shed. "It isn't forgiveness. It isn't rescue. It's time." Nora looked at him carefully. "Why?" Grant exhaled. "Because I wrote you down as irresponsible before I knew what you were carrying." It was not a grand apology. That made it easier to believe. Adrian Pike called twice that evening. Nora did not answer. Instead, the families sat around Ray's workbench and began writing down what they remembered: who had brought seed to the station, who had signed forms, who had stored jars in church basements, who had spoken of test plots that never came back with names attached. Samuel wrote beside them. Not leading, recording. By dark, they had agreed on 3 things. The original log would be copied and placed with a state agricultural attorney the next morning. The M13 seedlings would remain on Bell Farm under shared witness until a neutral seed lab could document them. And a temporary Mason County seed trust would be formed, not to sell the line, but to keep Northstar or anyone else from swallowing the proof before the families understood their rights. When the last truck left, Nora stood alone by the shed. The freezer was still broken. The farm was still in debt. The heat wave had not ended. Northstar had not gone away, but the secret was no longer alone in her hands. That changed its weight. Behind her, Ray shut off the yard light. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, arguments, and probably worse letters. But tonight, for the first time, the names her mother saved had been spoken aloud by the people who owned them. And in the dark beside the well house, the small green plants kept growing toward a future none of them could yet afford to lose. By October, the heat wave had a name in county records. Farmers would talk about it for years by the year it happened. The way their grandparents had spoken of droughts, floods, early frosts, and the summer a whole valley learned how thin luck could be. Some fields recovered a little after the late rains. Some did not. Bell Farm survived, but not beautifully. The south fence still leaned in places. The porch still needed paint. The well pump had been repaired with used parts. Ray's patience, and 2 afternoons of language Lila would not have allowed in the kitchen. The bank did not forgive the loan. Grant Voss did not become a hero. But the review hold became an extension, and the extension became enough time for Nora to plant winter cover and breathe without counting every sunrise like a warning. Northstar did not disappear either. Their lawyers challenged the records. They questioned chain of custody. They used phrases like unauthorized possession and legacy material contamination. They tried, more than once, to make Lila Bell the center of the argument instead of the names she had saved. But this time, Lila was not alone in the file. Samuel Pike signed his statement. Mrs. Delgado signed hers. So did the Freemans, the Hollises, the Mercers, the Aldridges, the Rusks, and more families who came forward after the first copies of the contribution log reached the state agricultural office. The case was not finished. That mattered. Some truths do not win by sunset. Some have to survive paperwork, delay, money, fear, and the quiet exhaustion of people hoping the poor will get tired before the powerful do. But the names had entered the record again. That could not be undone easily. The temporary Mason County Seed Trust became a cooperative before Thanksgiving. They held the first meeting in the basement of the old Grange Hall because no one wanted to use the county building yet. Folding chairs scraped against the floor. Coffee burned in 2 metal urns. Children ran between adults who were trying to discuss bylaws, seed storage, lab testing, and legal fees. Nora sat near the back at first. She had spent so long carrying the freezer as if it were her mother's secret that it felt strange to hear other people speak about it as their inheritance, too. But that was the point. It was not hers to keep. The M13 seedlings, documented and tested under witness, had been transferred to a neutral seed lab, then to cooperative custody under court-supervised agreement. No one was allowed to sell, license, or multiply the line commercially until ownership and contribution rights were reviewed. That frustrated some people. It protected all of them. The broken freezer was harder. People asked what should happen to it. A reporter from the county paper suggested it belonged in a display case. Someone else said it should go to the state archive. A retired teacher offered to help write a plaque. Nora listened to all of it, then looked at the machine sitting on a trailer outside the Grange Hall. It looked worse than ever in the cold light. The door sagged. The back was open. The compressor was dead beyond repair. Rust had spread around the bottom edge. It was still the same ugly freezer that had made people laugh at the auction. Only now, no one called it junk. Samuel stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets. "What do you think Lila would want?" he asked. Nora watched a little girl press her mittened hand against the cereal plate. "I think she'd hate a plaque that made her sound braver than she felt." Samuel nodded slowly. "She was brave. She was scared," Nora said. "And she still did it. That's different. Maybe better." In the end, they did not preserve the freezer whole. The compressor and damaged casing were removed. The rusted shell was taken apart. The insulated rear compartment, the cereal plate, the brass gauge, and the section of panel where the hidden log had rested were placed in cooperative custody, not as a monument, but as proof. The rest of the metal was recycled. Ray said that seemed disrespectful at first. Then Nora told him something her mother had written in the margin of the cleaning schedule. "Keep what proves. Let go of what only weighs." After that, he helped unbolt the door. Winter came early that year. On a gray Saturday in December, the cooperative opened its first seed record workshop in the back room of the Grange Hall. Nora did not think of herself as a teacher, but somehow she stood at the front with a stack of blank labels, a box of envelopes, and Lila's copied log projected on the wall. There were farmers there, and children, and 2 high school students who said they wanted to study agriculture but did not want to leave Mason County forever. Nora showed them how to write more than a variety name. She showed them how to record who saved the seed, what field it came from, what season tested it, what family carried it, and who had permission to use it. A girl about 12 raised her hand. "If the seed still grows," she asked, "why do the names matter so much?" The room went quiet. Nora looked at the copied log on the wall. Then, she looked at the girl. "Because food remembers hands," she said, "even when paperwork doesn't." No one spoke for a moment. Then Mrs. Delgado, sitting in the front row, nodded once. That was enough. Near the end of the workshop, Nora opened a small padded case and took out the freezer's serial plate. MCS4179C, the number her mother had circled, the number everyone else had missed, the number that had led them from a county auction to a room full of names. She did not hang it on a wall. She handed it to the cooperative secretary, who placed it in the evidence box beside the contribution log copies and the brass gauge. A thing put back into service, not worship. That evening, Nora drove home alone. Bell Farm sat under a thin skin of frost, quiet and unfinished. The barn still leaned. The fields were bare. The house windows glowed gold against the dark. On the kitchen table, Lila's letter lay folded beside Nora's seed notebook. Nora touched the paper once, then set a new label beside it. M13 Cooperative Line. Original contributors attached. Do not separate names from seed. Outside, the repaired well pump clicked softly and held. For the first time in months, Nora did not hear it as a warning. She heard it as something still working. The freezer had been called junk once. Nora never corrected everyone who said so. She only kept the part that proved the truth, gave the rest back to the world, and made sure that from then on, whenever those seeds were planted, the names went into the ground with them.